Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski.
Today on the podcast, we're with someone born in New York, moved to California at an early age, excelled in track and field at an early age, came to distance running a little bit later. This introduction can never do justice. We've got someone who's a barrier breaker, a pioneer, changed the sport, changed the Olympics, and here's just one thing to blow your mind. In consecutive years, our guest both won a national championship and set a world record. The distances were over 25 miles apart. So a mile national champion and a marathon world record breaker. That's not the biggest distance. She also won a national championship at 50 miles. I'm not going to try to list everything. There's Lifetime Achievement Awards, Hall of Fame Awards, Leadership Awards. Just a pleasure today to have on the podcast Jacqueline Hansen. Hi, Jacqueline.
Hi, thank you very much. What a great introduction.
It is a challenge because your life and biography and history is fascinating and you're still active doing so many things. I don't know if we'll get all the things in here that are just so fun, from winning the Boston Marathon, going back to be official starter, working with Willie Banks on coaching, working as an educator, all these things, and a keynote speaker if anybody's looking for one. Let's start with your background as a child. Do you remember moving at age 8? What was it like moving across the country?
It was my first flight. It was a TWA flight in February 1957. I think I was in the first or second grade. I think it was a propeller plane. I got very airsick. I got motion sickness. It was not fun. That's as much as I remember. But I do remember like arriving in California and everything was so flat and broad and wide, and cars. I'm still an expert on the cars of the 50s because I would just sit on the porch and watch the cars go by. I don't know. It was something that fascinated me. But other than that, I don't have a whole lot of memories of Pennsylvania, no.
Then quickly adjusting to your new life, how was transitioning to a new school and getting involved in all that?
Yeah, I barely remember going to school back in Pennsylvania. And by the way, even though I was born in New York, we lived in Pennsylvania on the other side of state line. Only the hospital was in New York. I do remember I changed schools almost every year. I was raised by my eldest sister, and her husband was getting degrees and getting promotions and moving up. I think I had a different school for every grade until I got to high school, and then I had the same school.
What was the start of your athletic career? You did a lot of different things in track and field in school.
Only because I failed at all the other sports. I hated PE. It was a painful experience. I'm a little on the short side, so nobody was picking me for the basketball team or the volleyball team, and I couldn't catch or throw. I particularly disliked softball. We had electives at my high school because we were that large that we actually had electives for PE, and I took everything and anything to get out of regular PE. I ended up in a tennis class, and I wasn't doing very well there, but the teacher was a national ranked thrower. And she wondered why there was a boys' track team without a girls' track team, and began one. And that was my introduction to track. Now, the longest we could run was 440 yards. So I tried every event. I didn't excel at anything. I'm glad that teacher, her name was Dixie Griffin, she lived long enough to know I finally found my event.
What kind of student were you in through high school?
Oh, just average. I got some A's and B's, nothing spectacular. But I two teachers influenced me that I will never forget. I've been in coaching education a lot, as you can see from my resume, and I always tell coaches, you really need to be careful what you say and also be a role model. How do you act? Because you never know when you're influencing a young athlete in a positive or negative way, and how do you want to be remembered? So I remember my two positive experiences. My English teacher, who taught me to love Shakespeare. I went off to college and majored in English and literature, especially Old English literature, but I loved to run. So I loved running as much as reading and vice versa. And those were my two influencers.
Your path to choosing the college and walking on as an athlete, right?
That was easy to walk on. I was usually alone. But my very first college was a community 2-year college, and they had a full girls track team, but they didn't have a coach, and the golf teacher oversaw it, but she didn't really coach it. She taught it like a skills test. Every other week we swapped events and learned new events. Then after class, my best friend and I would go run for real. So there too, I wasn't showing any talent or any gift at the time, but I was having fun. And maybe we could run as far as 880 yards. So we got a little longer. And then by the time I got to my 4-year college, I was the only one who showed up for track class, the only female. It was a basketball teacher who took the class over, and she said, I won't cancel it. I see you out there running every day. So if you go to this track meet over at UCLA, I'll give you credit. And okay, I became the AIAW National Mile champion because not only was I out there running every day, I met a woman who belonged to a club and had a coach and invited me. So now I had my first training.
And who was that? How did you adjust to that?
Oh, that's pretty funny because I was in over my head. My running was only in the spring, the fair weather runner, only during track season, and I was on my own. I met a woman named Judy Graham. I joined her club, LA Track Club, under Laszlo Tabori, the great Laszlo Tabori. Had I known how great he was, I would have been too afraid to go. He took anybody and everybody who would commit and be dedicated to train. He was very intimidating. He was a real disciplinarian. So I was too intimidated to quit because even the warm-up was more than I'd ever run. I knew I was in over my head immediately, first workout, and I just wanted to die. I just wanted to go home and lay down and die. But he said, I'll see you next time, and you better be there next time. He was just that demanding. I'm sure he couldn't give me a full workout. I'm sure he had to bring me along because I couldn't handle that kind of mileage. We were all trained as middle distance runners. He was the third man in the world to break the 4-minute mile behind Bannister. So we were all trained as milers, every one of us. That is why I won the AIAW National Championships while I was at Cal State Northridge without a team or a coach, for real, not really one, just in name only. But I was training with Laszlo Tabori on the other side of town.
That's an interesting thing that's come up with some people where everybody was training to be a long distance runner, even if we're racing shorter. So there were a lot of people who were milers, who could run a marathon. When did that first come, the idea that you could run a marathon?
I saw Cheryl Bridges do it. My very first marathon I ever watched was a teammate, not somebody who trained with us, but she was a member of our club. She was a member for convenience, but she needed a club, but she trained in San Luis Obispo. She told me after one cross-country season in 1971 that she was coming back to Culver City to run a marathon. And we went out to cheer her on. She broke 250. She made it look easy, and I thought maybe I could do that. If she could do that, why, I can run with her on track. I can run with her in cross country. Maybe I could do that. And a whole year later, I thought about it again and asked my coach if I could do it on 2 weeks' notice. I think it was that mega mileage, even though it was intervals, all the time. I could be out on that track for 3 hours doing interval. So I think in a way I didn't have any long runs, but I have mileage. And I think that saved me. It didn't help me out at the 20-mile mark. I hit the wall big time, and I could have walked faster the last 6 miles. And I said, I'll never do that again. But I think that mileage must have saved me, the overall.
Your logs, when do your running logs begin? The records you have of the training, because you have extensive logs, which are big insight into that.
Yeah, I put the 3 peak years on my website, but I have 40 years of running journals. I donated the bulk of my collection already to a safe place, UMass Library in Amherst. I live in threat of a fire. I live in a canyon. Every year we have to evacuate for some fire. So I want everything in a safe place. So it's all settled. My mileage, wow. What do you want to know specifically? Because you've so much.
Have you made it halfway to the moon? I think you probably have.
Oh, yeah. I quit counting at 100,000 a long time ago.
Yeah.
Because I stopped doing workouts. And I think some of my peak years were like up to 4,000 or 5,000 miles a year. And then I safely cut that way in half the year I was pregnant. And it went up when I trained the 50 miler, it went up, went back down. I ended my career by being a middle distance runner again with the 1,500 and 5,000. Then when I stopped competing, I stopped counting the miles. I still tried to do minimum 30 up to an hour or more a day of something. But now it's running in the pool, riding my elliptico, or taking long walks.
Nice. Let's just get a little detail on that. Those final competition for you was in the Masters, and you were world champion.
Right. I went down to Melbourne, Australia for World Masters Championships. I dedicated the 1,500 to my coach, Laszlo, because his last Olympics were in 1956 in Melbourne. To my good fortune, got out of Hungary during the Hungarian Revolution. He was in the army. He, under gunfire, got out of town and went to the Olympics and missed a medal by a nose and never went home. He came, Sports Illustrated brought many Hungarian athletes who defected and came to California or elsewhere in the United States, to my good fortune. I am fortunate to have one coach my whole life. I adapted to his system. It was rough, but I didn't have any bad habits or previous coaches or any system, so I adapted to his. Somebody said at the memorial, we were like lightning in a bottle. He worked for me, and I worked for him. And yeah, so I had mega miles, but all intervals on the track, and we learned how to be a marathoner together. Most people, when they get older, they go longer, but I went back to track. I went back to 1,500 and 5,000. It was less mileage, easier on my legs, but my knees were giving out, and they gave out eventually anyway. So I had to stop running hills and long distance and so forth because of my knees. And I lasted on the track a little longer. Like you said, I got the 1,500 and 5,000 world championships. I went back to defend my title, and my knee gave out, and I haven't competed since.
Yeah, I know a lot of us look back and say, the speed goes away, but for you, it's fun. It's interesting to think about as you're competing and racing. It feels the same. If you don't have a clock and you don't look at the track passing by when you're running at full effort, it's fun. It's fun to race. I raced again at age 60. It is fun.
I laughed on my victory lap. I laughed. I was giggling uncontrollably because it was so much fun. And it was over so quick, and it didn't hurt a bit. Like a marathon, you feel like a truck ran over you the next day, and you've got a long recovery. But with that one, it was like the 1,500 was over, and okay, day after tomorrow, I'm going to do the 5. because I can. And I won both of them. And that's a longer story. It wasn't quite that easy. They had bad weather, but I prevailed. And it was fun. It was all fun again.
Let's go back to some of the early days with your relationship with other female runners. You were a small community there. Who were you finding as your inspiration to do the first marathon, and then you did that? What were you finding in 1972 when you were conquering the first marathon?
Because Cheryl didn't come back to Culver City, but I ran it anyway. And I figured that's why I got to win, even though I hit the wall. I thought I'll never do that again until I got that medal around my neck. And I thought, if I actually trained for this, you're hooked when you start thinking about the next time. Then I went back to workout, and a very close friend of mine named Patrick Miller went to Yale. He lived in my hometown and he trained with Laszlo when he was home, but he went to Yale and he always ran Boston every year. I'd never heard of Boston, but he said they added a women's division for the first time. And you just won Culver City. You should go to Boston next. After I got a little education about what's in Boston, I went. I didn't know anybody there other than Patrick, and I won. I just won. I think I got lucky because the weather, they were having a heat wave and it didn't bother me a bit. But yeah, I can thank Nina Kusick, who was the winner, 72. That was the first year for women. And she went and worked through the AAU to get the rules changed to get a women's division. I think it's very appropriate that she was the first winner in 72 after Bobby Gibb had unofficially won 3 years in a row. And then Sarah Mae Berman 3 years in a row. Then Nina, and we have all gotten all our medals and recognition, the pioneers included, everybody. It's cool. I still go to Boston for reunions. I don't go to high school reunions. I go to Boston. I'm very close with all of them, Bobby, Sarah Mae, Nina, and many more. And we get together every year. I just had my 50th anniversary there. We had a big party last year, great big party. It was so much fun. So from there, I'm lucky that there were just enough pioneers ahead of me to open those doors, yet I'm still part of history. I'm living it year by year. The next one, I got to go to Germany to the first international marathon put on by Dr. Ernest von Achen, who is our unsung hero. He got our 800 meters back into the Olympics. He pushed the 1500 meters into the Olympics in 72. He was staging the international marathon to prove to the Olympic Committee we can also run the marathon, that we're not the weaker sex. So I was very fortunate to go there. Now, the AAU didn't send me. They didn't put me on the USA team because they had a national championships that I had to skip because I had a cross-country national championships I ran for my team. Anyway, they weren't going to put me on the USA team, so a man named Bruce Stern, the actor, he was my husband's training partner, his best friend. He said, I'll sponsor her. She needs to go. And I came in first American. So thank you to Bruce for giving me that opportunity. That taught me that I can run with the best women in the world. I didn't win that one, but I won 12 out of my first 15, but I didn't win that one, but I was first American. When I came home, that's when I set my first world record in the next marathon in December in Culver City. And I warmed up with Bruce. He said, don't be nervous. He said, you can do this. Just run your own race. I know how to pick winners, and I'm glad I picked you. And
That's great.
so he gave me that confidence.
I don't know what kind of runner he was. He certainly starred in a movie as a runner.
Yeah.
You can track down his biography and watch him run. I remember watching that and saying, he looks like a real runner. They may have cast a runner.
He trained with my husband in the Santa Monica Track Club under Joe Douglas. And Joe Douglas and my coach, Laszlo, were both Igloy runners. Mihaly Igloy trained them. They went off. So Joe began the Santa Monica Track Club, and my coach began the San Fernando Valley Track Club. We were all under that Hungarian family tree. And Bruce ran 50 milers. He told me not to do that, but I didn't listen.
How competitive were you earlier in life with not being very good at things,
Yeah.
then suddenly becoming champion, world record holder? How was the reaction of people who knew you, and how was your own personal reaction to success?
I was a mediocre miler first. I had a little success. I won the National Collegiate and I won World Masters, but as an open runner, I never made any USA team. Remember, I'm in a district with people like Francie LaRue, Mary Decker, Debbie Heald, Ruth Wysocki. I wasn't even the fastest miler on my own team. I was put in my place. I'm having a little success, but I was put in my place until the marathon. I blossomed. I just blossomed. And that was a lot of fun. I never thought I had done my best. I always thought I would get better. You always do. Okay, that one world record gone, but on to the next one. And I never did get any faster than 2:38, but that's okay. That world record got broken, but I got to keep the part about being the first to do it.
The 240 barrier, was that a thing that people talked about when you were running?
Yeah, huge. It was a huge. 240. I know my book editor said I was the first to break 245, and I go, Joe, that's not a thing. But the 240, that was huge. And then along came Greta White's and sub 230. Yeah, those are barriers. Those I'm very proud of. It's okay. It's okay. I'm more proud of moving on into my activism. And I'm more proud of that than world records.
Let's talk about that. But one more thing, just about where else you ran. You ran and won Honolulu. You ran in Germany. Where else did you get to?
I won Catalina 3 times, Culver City 3 times, Avenue of the Giants, Cleveland, Boston, Oregon, of course. I won, even later, I won a small one in Gales Creek, Portland, Oregon, Honolulu. I won 12 out of my competitive 15. Then I had 4 more trying to qualify for the Olympic trials and then running the Olympic trials. And those weren't wins, but they were victories nonetheless.
And again, pioneering, being there at the first, it's a great collection of firsts and barrier breakers. What about your injuries and stresses that happened? What was that like?
As a track runner, Laszlo never let us run on cement or pavement. We ran on grass or dirt or an artificial track. Even in our workouts, we had a dirt track, but we only got on the track when he was timing us, and the rest of it was on the grass on the inside of the track. So I never had an injury as a track runner, but then, of course, as a road runner, I had to put in the miles. I have had a total of 17 surgeries, most of them orthopedic, but I've survived all of them. I have 2 new knees and a new shoulder, not a running injury. But genetically, I have arthritis. I have osteoporosis. I never had strong bones. I don't know. I wasn't really built for this, and I just wore everything out. But I've been very lucky to work through most of my injuries. I had good orthopedic doctors that keep putting me back together.
While you were in university studying, what was your vision for what you would do as a career or your life?
Oh, I don't know what I was going to do. I always wanted to maybe be a writer. That hasn't worked out too much. I've done a fair share of writing, but I'm certainly not making a living at it. I ended up coming into teaching in the back door. I started coaching, but you can't live on a coaching stipend. So they gave me PE classes and health classes. Then I went back to school, went to graduate school, got more degrees, got more credentials. After I already started teaching, my favorite job was probably coaching education. I really love doing that. That was fun, putting on clinics for all the different sports, editing manuals, writing training manuals for the coaches in all these different sports for youth. I've always worked with high school, and I've mostly coached high school. I've done some other coaching, elites or all women teams or charity runners, but the majority of my education and coaching have been with high school. And I am a secondary credentialed teacher. I'm still I'm teaching here. I'm teaching teachers who teach K-12.
Touched a lot of lives, and you're not minimizing it. I'll just encourage everyone to go to JacquelineHansen.com and read, and Wikipedia, they can read. What is your organization with Willie Banks?
Willie Banks and Mike Powell, and may he rest in peace, Dick Fosbury, and many other Olympians put together these running track and field camps for high school kids. Instead of them coming to us, we go to them. So we even put on camps on the Air Force Base in Japan with the American families. Did you know those bases are large enough to have an elementary, middle, and high school, restaurants, stores, American families? They have their own leagues and track meets. We've gone to Texas and Wyoming and Montana and Washington and Japan. We've gone all over the map. COVID shut a lot of that down, but it's beginning to grow again. I love coaching kids, and that was a fun way. I still am in touch with a lot of those campers, and we text. So I coach by text. So it's fun. And they're coaches. I thought Willie was very clever. If you haven't met him yet, he's a Pied Piper. He can get those kids. Can you imagine getting freshman kids together with senior kids doing like dancing for fun? It's not Zumba, but it's something similar. And he gets them playing and exercising and building a team, to building that team bonding. Then they go out and we intermix the fun games with the actual track and field skills. He does a really great job of this. It's really a lot of fun. He's fun to watch. So those are world record camps founded by Willie Banks and Mike Powell.
It's not surprising that you recognize someone who helps bring barriers down between people. And let's talk about your activism. We can only cover so much in whatever time we're going to have in these interviews. When did you recognize that you could be a leader in change?
I'm thinking that I had 2 world records, and the Montreal Olympics is about to come and go without my event. And I can't play. I've been a miler, and I could go to the Olympic trials. If I'm good enough, I can go on an Olympic team. But I'm a world record holder in a marathon, and I have nowhere to go with it. That began it. When people started assuming I would be a favorite in Montreal, and I'm going, yeah, except they don't have my event. So it began with a little bit of naivete and a little bit of self-centered. Okay, let's change this so I can go next year. We can change it. We have a whole year. We can change it in a year. I just had no idea it was going to take 10 years. It took a committee and a court battle. It's just hard to fathom. We're not talking about another century. We're talking about in my lifetime. Women were not allowed to, not permitted. They were prohibited from running anything longer than a 1,500 meter, the metric mile, in the Olympic Games. I still meet people today who can't believe that we didn't always have the marathon, that it just came in 1984. So my records were like 74 to 77. And by 1979, my husband, Joe Henderson, Pam McGee of Nike, we founded the International Runners Committee and added a total of 13 members who were all movers and shakers in the running world. We had a statistician, Ken Young. We had Jeff Darman, president of the RRCA, and Henley Gabot, who was also RRCA and in charge of the Women's Committee, and Nina Cusick and Doris Heritage and Joan Elliott, and all movers and shakers and experts in their field, and all activists and advocates.
You were the president of
Right.
this big group of movers and shakers. How did that come to you taking the president role there?
I can't even remember, but I guess if you want something done, you have to volunteer. And if they wanted to make me president, I know for a while I shared that position with L.A. Mendonça from Brazil and Lynn Bellington. Oh, I didn't mention Lynn Bellington of England. So we had international representatives. We all just did what we could to lobby, to petition, to call, to meet, to go to meetings. We hired a lobbyist to train us how to lobby. He was involved in that act of Congress when the AAU became TAC, and now they're USATF. And there was a whole act of Congress. So this lobbyist knew the inside scoop on how things work. We studied the IOC charter. We lobbied the IAAF. We learned the process, the procedures, the timelines, and did the best we could to satisfy all the requirements. And I guess my biggest role was probably figuring out that, okay, the marathon's going to go in because we're not the only ones fighting for it and everybody wants it and it's very popular. And I'm sure TV came in and said, hey, like, we'd like to buy the rights. That went in first. But nobody was thinking about the 5 and 10. And Joe has said this about me, that I'm the only one that's hung in there and said our job isn't done. I met with the president of the IAAF and the secretary, and that story I've told before. I'm sure you've heard it, but they yelled at me and said, those are boring events. They won't sell tickets at the games. We don't care. You're never getting them in. Forget about it. Really told me to go away. So I went to the ACLU, and that began the lawsuit for the 5 and 10. We didn't win in court.
And as you were saying, it was later that the 5 and 10K were the following Olympics.
Well, the marathon went in 1984. We went through many court dates for the lawsuit for the 5 and 10. And we technically didn't win in court, so it didn't happen in LA. But within 30 days, they approved it for the next games, only the 10, for 1988 in Korea. The reason they gave me about holding back on the 5 was they knew that adding the 3,084 was a mistake. In their mind, it was the next distance after 1,500. But as I told them, the men don't have a flat 3,000. We don't want a flat 3,000. We want a 5. We weren't steeplechasing then, so we weren't pushing for it, but we knew that would come later. So the 10 went in 88. They held back and added the 5 in 96 and took out the 3. They said, we don't want to look stupid by replacing the 3 immediately. And I said, you already couldn't look more stupid. But they wouldn't put the 5 in until 96, pulled back the 3, put the 3 in 2008. I'd have to look at my own book to get the dates straight. Then they put that 3 back in with steeplechase. And that was when we had a complete parity with the men. It took all that. I was thinking about it on the drive into work this morning. What about those women 50K walkers? What about the heptathletes that want the decathlon? Well, there's a bunch of things. We don't have complete parity, but we're getting there. And then I got asked to join a group on Facebook. I forgot about the equal distance cross country for NC2A. And there are still a lot of inequalities going on out there. And I'll just ask did you hear about the women's ski jumpers?
I didn't.
I joined their lawsuit. They came to me. They asked if they could parallel their lawsuit after ours, and I sent all their lawyers our copies of our legal documents, and they've been quick. They were suing as late as 2010. They were the last winter sport without a women's component. Meanwhile, they were adding snowboarding and aerial jumping and all this stuff. ahead of the women's ski jumpers without going through the process of what the IOC charter laid out, and because they were selling tickets. They were popular. The games were in Vancouver, in Canada, so they don't have the ACLU. They have the Human Rights Commission. They sued through the Human Rights Commission. They didn't get in 2010, of course, but they got in 2014, and those girls were still young enough. They all jumped. I was
Wow.
they were crying about losing in court, and I said, you wait. In about a week, you're going to have your event in next time. You'll wait and see. It has to look like their idea. It happened exactly like that. And I was so happy. Every one of them got to jump. There's just so many who can make a team. The youngest one, who really started the whole thing for me, the very youngest one, Abby, she jumped the next Olympics because she was young enough to still be good. So they all got to be Olympians. And I said, you did better than me. I never owned an Olympian. I'll just be a record holder and never an Olympian. But isn't it crazy that the stuff still goes on?
Yeah, it's interesting that it still occurs to you to say there's still more we can do. Those things are just far from front of mind for most of us watching and looking at progress. Can I ask you, what have you learned that you would tell other people about activism? What'd you learn about yourself, about perseverance, and were you built for this, or how did you come to excel in this?
I don't know. One English reporter had it. He was so wrong. He pictured me as one of those wide-eyed, frizzy-haired, feminist. What did he say? Litigation-happy feminists from Los Angeles. And I'm not that person. I am not that person. I just saw something wrong in my sport that I thought I knew how to fix. I thought it.
And he obviously hadn't seen your hair.
I mean, it's very great. I am not this crazy feminist about spouting off about everything under the sun. I am not. I just knew there's something wrong and unfair going on. In fact, when I called up the ACLU after that encounter with Nebbiolo, telling me that I'll never get my events in the games, that's a big red flag. When I called the ACLU, it was because Ramona Ripson, executive director of the ACLU, had commissioned the Women's Sports Foundation to report on the status of women in games coming to LA. She said, can you believe we only have 1/3 of the events that the men have? I couldn't call her fast enough to say, I don't know about these other sports, but let me tell you what's happening in our sport. I think I can thank Dixie Griffin in high school, who said, why isn't there a track team for girls like the boys have? Why? Why is the big question? Or even more importantly, why not? I would say in general that the opposition we were facing, the barriers they were putting up in front of us, it was at best apathy. It had always been that way. It could stay that way. And at worst, it was discrimination, which we proved in court. And I love one of my lawyers. When I got that ACLU award, we had a dinner party and a program, and one of my lawyers had put in there the Pierre de Coubertin quote about astounding the modern Olympic Games with the exaltation of male athleticism with female applause as their reward. And it was like, she just went, and eat your heart out, Pierre. So there was that. Also, if you're not part of the solution, you might be part of the problem. So if you want a solution, you have to be willing to do something about it.
When did you first see yourself, if you ever have, as a pioneer and as someone to take things down? From being on the first women's track team, that might have just been, oh, a door opened, great. And as you said, there were some positions of there's a little bit of a self-gain if these changes can be made. But how did your view of yourself?
I very quickly became disillusioned and didn't care if I went to the Olympics because I didn't like those people very much. And I could see we were pawns in the game. It popped my balloon.
Wow.
But I know I can still remember being younger. Going to the Olympics was a big deal, a dream. So I really began to just keep going for that. There are younger women than me who still, it's their dream to go to the Olympics. They deserve that. That's what struck me when I watched Joan Benoit run down the streets of LA, and that the marathon had come to my town first, and she was being watched on TV all over the world by little girls who now know they can go be an Olympic marathoner if they want to. So it was all worthwhile, even though I don't like those people anymore and I don't care. I'm not going, but I also don't like them. They don't play fair.
You've been on panels to discuss all of this history and the ideas and the changes that you were part of on panels with Joan Benoit, with Lorraine Moeller, people who then were able to go to the Olympics in their event. What kind of relationship did you have with them? You were done competing against those people that you were helping.
Wow. Yeah. There's a lot of camaraderie, especially with, like you said, all the women runners of the 70s. We all knew each other by first name. I didn't mention earlier when we were talking about women who influenced me or that I competed with, they were rivals, but they were friends. That can go together. And I also credit Christa Wallensiek of Germany and Chantal Langlace of France. We traded records back and forth all the time. Not just the marathon, also things like the hour run. I wanted to be the first one to break 10, but Krista did it first. And I went farther, and then she went farther. We had this competition going on, not always seeing each other, but we encouraged each other. I think we brought out the best in each other. As far as my American friends, and Lorraine does live here in Colorado, even though she's a New Zealander, she said one thing that's pertinent about there just aren't enough seats for everybody to go to the Olympics because we only have the marathon. So we really need the 5 and 10. A lot of good runners were being left at home because there's only 3 berths for every country and every event. So there's that. I did make sure, come hell or high water, that I ran those first Olympic trials for the marathon. Even though I walked a lot in the last 6 miles, it was my 4th marathon in 4 months, and I had hypothermia, and then I had mono, then I had pneumonia. So I was completely worn out, but I finished that marathon. My colleagues were patting me on the back and encouraging me as they passed me and thanking me that we had this opportunity to run this event. We just had a 40th anniversary reunion of the first Olympic trials, and they're still thanking me. That's why I say it was worth every bit of it, even if I didn't get to be an Olympian. It was worth more than a world record. It was worth more than any gold medal. And I have their respect and their gratitude. And yeah, that warms my heart.
Yeah, talking to you warms my heart. I think everyone who hears this who has been involved in sport or just fighting for anything will feel inspired and feel like they want to just thank you for doing the fights that you thought were worth fighting for. What about the Avon Marathon earlier? Did you have involvement with that?
Yes and no. I participated in 1 or 2 of their marathons. Definitely, they had a big influence on the movement to get the marathon recognition, to show that we had worldwide. Part of the reason that we always had to prove how many countries were represented by women in the marathon was because one of the rules of the charter to add a new event is to be in 25 countries on 3 different continents. So that was the reason, by trying to spread them around the world and bring attention. And I think finally Adrian Pullen of the IAAF, I think it was probably that Tokyo Women's Marathon, that he finally got his blessing and got the IAAF turned around to thinking towards, hey, yeah, maybe they can. And then when you have a 40-year-old woman like Joyce Smith winning, it's okay, the women are not the weaker sex. You know, we're tough as nails, and we should be in the marathon.
But when you were born, when you had your career, you're placed into this place and time, on which continent, in which decades you were there. Just at the end of your main career racing was the change to money. How do you feel about that? You competed almost exclusively as an amateur athlete.
Yeah, no, really is amateur with a capital A. I was totally before prize money, but it's okay because I don't think I would want my paycheck to depend on my performance. If we can have a take the fun out of it, I ran what I wanted, when I wanted, how I felt. I always use traveling as part of the experience. Let me fly in, have a day of travel, a day of rest, a day of a race, and 5 days to 7 days after as a tourist, because I'd love to travel and I'd love to really get the feel of what it's like to be in a new town. I wouldn't mind a little prize money. I wouldn't mind a Mercedes car after the fact, but that's not going to happen. I don't think it would have been as much fun if my paycheck depended on my performance.
It certainly changed the experience with sponsorship and sponsored races. You were able to pick what you wanted, enjoy it. Now you dedicate so much time and you give your time freely and your efforts. But with that sponsorships came some obligations to show up at press conferences. And that would have changed the experience. That's when it was changing.
Yes, definitely was. I never had to buy a pair of shoes. I always had equipment. Even as a mediocre miler, Adidas was always good to me. They were ahead of their time by outfitting women. If you look at any of my track racing pictures from the very early, like 1971 and 2, before I got into road racing, we were all wearing Adidas. When I went to Germany to run that international marathon, my Adidas rep was John Bragg and John Pinnell, but mainly John Bragg. He arranged for me to stay in the hotel at the factory, got picked up by a driver, taken to their hotel, toured the factory. I had dinner with Adi Dassler and his wife. I actually did. I really feel like one of the most fortunate women on earth. I've met a lot of great people. I met Jesse Owens. I met Steve Prefontaine. I met Adi Dassler. I met so many people in the early days.
There are a lot of people that will get to say, I met Jacqueline Hansen. Realize that.
I don't know if I'm that much of a household name, no.
No, not a household name, but in the sport and in the community, you certainly are. You're charming, you're well-spoken, you are selfless seeming. I won't go ahead and try to delve into your entire psyche, but you've done so much. You continue to do so much. Let's go dark. The sport has changed. I know you have some disillusionment with the people who were fighting against progress for equality for women's sports. What about what's going on with doping and drugs and the sport and the women's side of it compared to the men's side? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm trying to educate myself about all of this because I'm a little out of touch, not having competed in a long time. But I know what you mean. I know what you're alluding to. I want to see fair play. I want to see the female athlete division protected. I want to see WADA and USADA get their act together. Why are they always behind the times? Why are they always reacting to instead of being proactive or being on top of things so that we have cheaters getting away with things? I know there's a long past history with skeletons in their closet about dopers who maybe got caught, maybe didn't get suspended, maybe should have been suspended, whatever, cover-ups. There's all kinds of rumors flying around. But why don't they just behave more professionally? Because a lot of people are losing interest in our sport. It's depressing. Every time you open a newsletter, another dozen or more athletes being found after the fact, and then we have prize money is all askewed and awards have to be redistributed. It's a mess. It's a mess. I am concerned about Title IX and maintaining what its original intention was for. I would like to see the women's division protected as it was meant to be. Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of clouds over our sport right now. Now, Dave, not to say that there aren't a lot of good things happening. Women are holding up more than half the sky in any given road race. They're turning out. I see new track tours popping up with more and more prize money. It would be fun if our sport could be more like other professional sports where even if you're not in the top 10, you could still make a living at the sport. That would be nice. It'd be nice to see prize money go deeper. But I would want to ensure that it stays fair for all. Yeah, so
I want to talk about the other things you've been involved with.
I've been a USA track, like a team manager, team coach, and even there, you're just a figurehead. You're not really coaching them.
They have individual coaches, most of the athletes.
Yeah, I just pull them together from around the country. We have a selection committee. We throw them on a team, and I get assigned to be the coach and go to Monaco or something, or Ekidens. I did a lot of Ekidens in Japan. But those are fun. You're just more like a chaperone than a coach, really, a tour guide.
You are still active teaching coaches. How far into the future horizon does that take up all of your bandwidth at this point? Is there anything else you want to do?
Yeah, I'd like to finish my second book, but I need to retire first, but I need to keep working until the bills are paid. So I would say maybe a year or two I could retire.
Lorraine Muller's written a book. Ann Audain's written a book. Many people. Is there anybody out there who you think has been less known? You've mentioned a lot of names. That's really nice. You've talked about some of the people which are not household names, which contributed in all this effort, many that you spearheaded.
Nina Cusick needs a book.
There we go.
He's the only one I know that doesn't have a book. I have a book, but it's just my memoir. I want to write a history book, which I have in the making, but it never quite gets finished because I keep working. But Nina Cusick totally needs a book. Unfortunately, it will have to be somebody writing her biography, not her.
It's 40 years since the first Olympic marathon. The backstory to getting to that and the changes in the Olympic hasn't been told in a film. I think the way that it's going to make it into the American and world psyche is really going to have to be a major motion picture.
We need Ken Burn. We need Ken Burn.
I don't know. You're out there, and I bet you know someone who knows Ken Burn, so it's not on your shoulders to get this done. I will be encouraging everybody who has connections to say there are a few stories that are more fundamentally earth-shattering than this effort. They can hang the tail on lots of other things happening. From the boys in the boat, talk personal stories. But the stories of the change there, as you say, runners today are completely unaware of the history. It's not that long ago. It's in our lifetimes. And it's wonderful to talk to you. You're still fresh and still passionate and still edgy about some of the elbows that you bumped into and some of the elbows that you had to spread to get these things done. We could talk all day. Let's just go a little bit more technical about your workouts. You mentioned the intervals. The thing that surprised me was running on the inside of the track on the grass. I haven't heard about that.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, seriously, Laszlo always, I don't know, I took it as normal, but you're right. He nitpicked every bit of our workout, including our form, how we dressed. We couldn't talk during workout, just during warm up and warm down. You ran on the grass, and only when he wanted to do a time trial, you ran on the dirt, and you never ran on cement until later. As track runners, and you tucked your shirts in, you didn't get a draft, like you didn't want to catch a chill. You wore your warm-up pants, your sweatsuit until you went to the starting line, and form was everything. People complimented me that said I had perfect form. Whether I was jogging, I don't know, I could be 10 minutes a mile or I could be 5 minutes a mile. I would get compliments on my form. Laszlo, I knew if I went out to work out tomorrow, he will still find something to correct. Your foot plant, your knee lift, where your elbows were, where your hands were, where your shoulders were, where your chin was, everything about your form got critiqued every workout. I'm not even making that up. But the workout itself, if there was ever a pattern, because honestly, we never got the same workout twice. as far as the intervals go, but maybe my 25 lappers in the morning workout, they were the same all the time. They were my favorite. I could just do them blindfolded. But every workout began with a 2.5 mile warm up, 15 times 100 between the football goal posts. They would be mixed up easy, medium, hard, or this many medium, that many hard, or he'd add it, whatever would add up to 15 of them. And if you didn't walk a recovery between the goalposts and the edge of the track and back, he'd make you start all over.
Ah,
I took a shortcut and I just turned around and ran the next one to get it over with. He would say, okay, you didn't do those right, do 15 more. So I never made that mistake. And then
yeah, that takes just one lesson. Yeah.
one night, I didn't forget my shoes. Somebody at school played a joke on me and took my shoes out of my locker. And I didn't know until I got to the track that I didn't have running shoes. He said, I can't let that be an excuse. Go home and get some shoes and come back. I didn't live close. I was out there till 9:30, setting an example so that nobody else would ever forget their shoes. So he was really strict about all these little things. And yet he knew you. He had the magic eye. He'd have 12 watches around his neck. And he knew where every runner in every group was in every set, and whether you were doing well or not, whether that was a good time or not. He kept a little black book. Everything would begin with short stuff like 150s or 220s, and maybe in the middle of the workout, you might go 500, 1,000, or even like the longest thing would be a 5-lapper. He's really timing the mile, but you didn't know which 4 laps, so you had to run all 5 laps hard. Then you'd come back down if you saw the workout peak, and then come back down with whatever, 400s, 300s, 200s, 150s. And even the last set, even if you were doing shakeups at the end, the 15 more shakeups at the end, but now they're probably medium and easy, you're recovering. But he might throw in a special. Now you get a time 200 in the middle of them, every third one. And you go, that's just more intervals. That's not special.
Or it can make a difference in racing, though, as the
Yeah.
pace shift. Those
When
are very
you're tired.
interesting skills, yes.
Yeah, when you're tired, you can find out you can still sprint. You can still change gears and sprint. My last workout before my 2:38, I'll always remember that one. That one was a huge example. I had 2 5-lappers in the middle of it, and they were 5-minute miles. He said, you're ready. And that was his send-off when I went off to Eugene. And I'm thinking, what does 2 5-minute miles have to do with running a marathon? But he knew if under that 17 miles of intervals, if I could knock off a couple of 5-minute miles, that I'd handle 6 minutes a mile fine all day long. And it was exactly what happened. Yeah, he knew when I was ready.
This has been great. You talk about these things as your life experiences very calmly, happily, cheerfully with your memories, but the long list of honors you've received. You did mention the age in a certain way. Is there anything you look back on with the most satisfaction that you achieved and got recognition for?
Yeah, that's hard. It is hard. I guess in one way, I was happy about the ACLU award, at least with the ACLU at that time, and who was in charge and who gave me the award. That meant a lot to me because that's outside of my peers, outside of my normal peers. I think I was alongside of other recipients like Rayford Johnson, Tommy Smith, and John Carlos. And so it won't get much better than that. With my peers and amongst them, I always wear this little necklace, this little runner necklace that my USA Track and Field Women's Long Distance Running Committee gave me. That was 1984 Woman of the Year. That's probably my favorite, because we had to sue the USA Track and Field along with the U.S. Olympic Committee, along with the LA Organizing Committee, and besides the IAAF and the IOC. But within the USATF, the women's LDR, some of them were on my committee and working with me. Those are my peers, and that means the most to me.
Great. We've done so many things that mean a lot to all of us, even if we're on the sideline, even if we're not part of women's sports specifically. It's been just a pleasure talking to you, smile the whole time, reflecting on this. So it's very fun to meet you and to hear this stuff in your own voice. And we'll hope that the book writing goes speedily when you can attack it full time. And we'll hope that somebody knows Ken Burns and can put this all on film.
Yes, indeed. You did your homework. I can't imagine adding one more thing. Thank you very much for being so thorough and understanding and appreciative.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you very much for all your time. Bye-bye.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Bye. You've been Garrick, Jackie's book, A Long Time Coming, Running Through the Women's Marathon Revolution, on Kindle, on Amazon, in paperback. Till next time.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.